All right, so the recording has started. And before the presentation starts, I'd like to read the online accessibility statement, and this serves as a reminder of the resources that we have available for students. Your experience here at Southern New Hampshire University is very important to us. It is our policy and practice to create an inclusive and accessible student experience. If there are any aspects of your experience that present barriers to accessibility, please notify the Online Accessibility Center or the OAC as soon as possible at 866-305-9430. And you can also email them at oac@snhu.edu or visit the Online Accessibility Center's website. So with that, I'd now like to turn it over to Sarah for her introduction.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Sarah Matta. I'm on the Learning and Development team here at SNHU and here to just support during this presentation. So I want to welcome all of you again and just want to introduce our speaker to you. So you're going to have a wealth of knowledge by the end of this, I promise. A lot of fun. So Kerry Koziell has been working at SNHU on the financial literacy team, I think I need to take that, for almost 5 years, delivering counseling and resources to students to aid in understanding student loan repayment and helping to create a great foundation for successful financial future. Previously, Kerry worked at New Hampshire's Higher Education Assistant Foundation for 7 years, and she was a presenter and counselor 10 years as a high school teacher. So we're really excited to have Kerry with us. Her knowledge is incredible, and I think you're really going to love this. So without further ado, we're going to hand that over to Kerry and take you on this great journey. So off to you, Kerry.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me this afternoon for our virtual Leads Conference 2020. Today we're going to be focusing on planning for student loan repayment. Although we're going to be focusing on that topic today, strategies for you moving forward with your student loan repayment, what's going to work for you. I would like to start by explaining a little bit about why this topic matters to me. The topic of personal finance matters to me. I became interested in it when I started thinking as a young adult where things had gone wrong, basically. So if you think back about where you learn about personal finance skills, you start thinking, well, what did I learn at home? And my experience growing up was that my parents really didn't talk about money a lot with us, not myself and my brothers. They talked a lot about other things, but they didn't talk about how much money they made or how much money was available. So when it came time for things like maybe going to a sports camp or even applying for college, I really didn't have a good idea of what was available. So it was kind of a taboo subject. And I also didn't get a whole lot of experience in my early education. There were no classes dedicated to learning personal finance skills, and that's really still the way that it is today. So a lot of what I learned about personal finance was through trial and error, through making a lot of mistakes, for putting myself really far back from where I needed to be because I didn't have that experience. I didn't have that education. And that's something that is sort of a passion project for me now, is to think about what are we offering to students in our schools, our elementary schools, and our high schools, and our colleges that are going to help prepare them for the challenges of understanding car loans and mortgages and how compound interest works versus simple interest and things like that. So I did want to start today with a poll so that I could get to know a little bit better about our audience. So if you could start the poll, where did you learn about money management? Was it through a class that you had at school, college, your parents, yourself? Okay, a lot of answers coming in. Great. Wow. Okay. That looks pretty good. So it looks like a vast majority of the people on the call today learned themselves, probably much like myself, through trial and error. There's been a little bit of learning from parents, and really, like I suspected, very little happening as far as elementary school or high school or college is concerned. It's really interesting to know and helps me out. Great. All right. So moving forward, here we go. Why are we here today? So we're here, of course, to talk about planning for student loan repayment, and I have a lot of great information to share with you about what's available for you, some strategy planning available for you. But first we want to talk about why we're here. So I just have a few statistics up here to talk about how people are sort of in general feeling about student loan repayment. So the first one in 10 borrowers don't know what types of student loans they have. That was very interesting to me, and we're going to definitely talk about that right off the bat. What's the difference between a federal loan and a private loan, and why it would matter to know the difference, and why it would matter would be because they have different terms for repayment. They have different protections attached to those loans. So it's important to sort of know the product that you're using, even when it's a loan. The second statistic, 1/2 of borrowers don't know the interest rates of their education loans. This is something that's really critical, to know the interest rates on any kind of debt that you're carrying, whether it's your credit card debt, whether it's your student loans, whether it's your car loan. What your interest rate is going to drive your strategy for paying down debt. You know, what has the highest interest rate? What's going to cost me the most over the life of a loan, and in what direction should I go in terms of paying down debt? Only 12% of borrowers in this survey through Student Loan Hero felt very confident in their knowledge of how education loans work. And that's okay, because you know, you might have had a few car loans over your life, or you might have been involved with mortgages and things like that, but this is a very specific and different type of loan that doesn't always operate the way that you would think. So that doesn't surprise me that there's low confidence in how this all works. And then 1 in 5 borrowers surveyed felt not confident at all, which is fine too. So I wanted to again go to the audience and ask, how confident do you feel about understanding repayment? And hopefully what we talk about today will either boost that confidence, or if you're feeling confident enough already with your repayment, good, that's great. Good, okay. Somewhat confident. That's good. So that's sort of what I was expecting, is that there's, you know, some knowledge, some understanding of what's going on. You probably did entrance counseling if you have federal direct loans, so you've got some information there. But it looks like overall this is going to be a good session for everybody. We can end that poll. Great. And then moving on, before we really get into the meat of the presentation, I think you should look at your student loan repayment not as your financial plan, but a part of your larger financial plan. So this is something that's kind of hard to think about sometimes, because we're thinking in the moment, we're thinking about the bills that are due now, or what's due next month, or how am I going to get through this, how am I going to get through that. But it's really important to take a step back and start thinking about your financial goals as a whole. So if the world was completely accessible to you, what would it be that would make you feel financially free? For some people, that's going to be, I just feel comfortable, my bills are paid, I have a little bit of money saved. Financial freedom for other people may be retiring early. It may be paying for my children's education. It may be having $1 million in the bank. So everyone's idea of what financial freedom is different. Everyone has different financial goals that we're working towards. But step one in this whole process, I think, is looking at, what do you want? We're talking about personal finance. So what is it for you that looks like success? And then the next step is, what does it actually take to get there? So where am I right now? And then when I look at where I want to be, what are the steps that have to happen? Do I need to pay down debt? Do I need to save more? Do I need to invest? So it's important to take a deep dive into your feelings about what you want and what it's going to take to get there, and then start creating a plan and committing to that. You also need to think about, what are my current responsibilities? You need to look at, where am I as far as debt is concerned? You need to understand the concept of the time value of money. So the more money that you're putting towards your debt, the less money that you're investing in yourself. You're putting your income towards that debt. You're not building wealth. So if your financial goal is to be really comfortable in terms of finances, you have to understand that, as the quote says here, debt and freedom, they pull in different directions. I love that quote, debt and freedom, they pull in different directions. So if you're looking for financial freedom, you have to take care of that debt first. So my last poll question before we move on, if we could pull that one up, is I just want to see what are some of your future financial dreams. I'm sure everyone's dream isn't to be filthy rich. There's got to be some others in there. I'll share my financial dream. Get out of student loan debt, good. Retire at a reasonable age. Security, rebuild the farmhouse. These are great. Financially stable on my own accord. Good, good. Security, love it. Control on debt, a good credit score. These are all attainable as well. Great. Travel, I love that one. Buy a house. I'm so glad I asked this question. This is great. Good. I could look at these all day. So, and it's no one on here really has said to be filthy rich. A lot of people just really want to be stable. They want to be happy. They want to have a home. They want to retire, own a tiny house. I love that. A house on the beach, that's great too. Great. Love it. Okay. I think we're ready. So we know that everybody has some future financial dreams here. So let's get started on getting us there. So the first step in terms of planning for student loan repayment is sort of unpacking what you have and understanding that you might have different types of loans. So we're going to talk about the two most common types of student loans that you may have, the first being your federal student loans and the second being your private student loans. So your federal student loans, these are the loans that you receive once you fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. So these are loans, are typically called direct loans. These are loans that come from the federal government, and they're repaid through a contracted servicer. So the lender is the Department of Education. The servicer would be something like Nelnet or Fed Loan or Sallie Mae that you pay back. So these are loans with borrowing limits, so the sky is not the limit here. There are different borrowing limits based on your status. So say, for example, you're a dependent student. A dependent student has parent information on the FAFSA, so they have certain limits of what they can borrow per year and then an aggregate lifetime borrowing amount. And then students who are independent, who don't have parent information on their FAFSA form, they have different borrowing amounts. But there are limits to what you can borrow. And what happens with that is sometimes students reach those limits and then they need to fill that gap, and sometimes they go in for a private loan to fill that gap. Federal student loans do not have a cosigner. They are not credit-based loans. The student who accepts the direct federal loan is solely responsible for that loan. These loans have a low and fixed interest rate for the life of the loan. So each year you have a new loan disbursement. Every July, the interest rates on those federal loans change. And on July 1st, 2020, the interest rate for the current year federal loans was announced, and that was 2.75%. So that's fairly low interest rate. And so for those loans dispersed after 7/1/2020, the interest rate will be 2.75, and that'll be fixed for the life of the loan. So that does not change. Federal loans have protections, and that's really the thing that makes them stand out from other loans, besides the fact that they don't really require a cosigner and they're not credit-based, but they do have protections attached, and we're going to talk a lot about what those are, what's good about those, and what's not good about those protections. And federal student loans have a 6-month grace period. So once you stop going to school, you have a 6 month, so your last date of attendance at school, you have a 6-month period of time where no payment is due on the loan. After that 6 months is up, you would begin repayment to your federal loan servicer. And we're going to talk about how to find out who your federal loan servicer is if you don't know. Usually a big question is, can I start paying before that? And absolutely, you can start paying while you're still in school. You can start paying during the grace period, or you can wait until the grace period is over. And there are some pros and cons to that, so we'll talk about that as well. So then on the flip side, we have the private loan. So this is a different type of loan because it's borrowed from a bank or credit union rather than borrowed through the federal government. It's a bank product like a mortgage or a car loan. These have varying borrowing limits, and they're typically pretty high. You can pretty much borrow what you need. However, these are loans that sometimes will require a co-signer if you have a low credit score or if you don't have a strong or long credit history. These loans are credit-based. So the interest rate that you get on a private student loan is going to be based on the credit of the borrower or the co-signer or a combination of. And currently, just look this up, the average interest rate for a private student loan is 7.81%. So as far as repayment options go with private student loans, they're pretty limited. It's pretty much a standard monthly payment versus federal student loans that have a couple different options that we're going to look at. But if you follow along with the industry, there are new products coming out for private student loans that do offer different types of repayment options. And typically there is a grace period similar to the 6-month grace period. So these are the two major types of loans, a federal student loan or a private student loan that comes from a bank or a credit union. As you could tell how I explain them, the federal student loan is more favorable in terms of no cosigner, in terms of a lower interest rate, in terms of some of the protections that come along with that. The private student loan typically will have a higher interest rate, but we will talk more about what to do about that as we move along. So when we're in the office, one of the things we say all the time is you need to know what you owe. And it doesn't mean know what you owe at the end of your experience. You should be checking in at the end of each semester or at least at the end of each academic year. What have I borrowed? How much interest has accrued? What are my interest rates? This is a good way to sort of stay on top of your student loan debt. So one thing that you can do is you can access your federal student loans at nslds.ed.gov. You use your FAFSA credentials to access this site. So what this is basically a data system that contains any federal student loan that was borrowed under your Social Security number and your name for the purpose of education through the Department of Ed. So this is a good way if you have transferred schools a lot, you took some federal loans a few years ago, and then you took some time off, or you went to one school and transferred to another school. This is sort of a clearinghouse that says this is what you borrowed, this is when you borrowed it, this is the interest rate that was attached to that particular loan, and this is who services the loan. So this is a place to find out who services your loan, what kind of interest has accrued, and you can see the current status of your loan, meaning the loan is currently deferred, or the loan is in repayment, or the loan is in default, or something like that. So this is for federal loans only. A word of caution though, NSLDS is updated by the loan servicers, and that happens about once a month. So if you want truly real-time interest accrual, you'd want to look to your servicer's website. So if I don't know my servicer, step one would be, let's go to NSLDS, look at my federal loans, and find my servicer. I find that my servicer is Nelnet. I go to the Nelnet website, nelnet.com, I believe it is, and I don't have an account set up already. I haven't registered myself on the website. I go to the website, I register myself using my name, my social, my birth date. That pulls in my information, and then I have a dashboard available to me that tells me, shows me how much interest has accrued. I can make payments through that website. So your servicer, your federal loan servicer, is going to be most up to date. But if you're looking for a launching point of how do I even begin to look at this information or find this information, you could start at NSLDS, and that would locate your federal student loans. Your private student loans, you probably know who you took those out from, but if you didn't, you could always check your credit report for that. Okay, so one thing that's really important, or a conversation that we have a lot, again, in our office, is that we kind of start thinking about repaying student loans at the end of our program. And really, if we could flip the conversation on that to start saying, well, what if we started looking at this earlier? Would that make a difference? And certainly it would. So this tool that I have up here on this slide, it's called the Student Loan Simulator. It's available at studentaid.gov /loan simulator. So this allows students to do a lot of things. This is a really good tool. I use this all the time when I'm counseling students, and I use it in a couple different ways. So the screenshot just shows, when you log in or when you go up to the website, it says, well, what do I want to do? I want to find the best repayment strategy, or I'm struggling with payments. Okay, so I want to find the best repayment strategy. So what I'm looking for really when I go into this website is to compare what is available to me for repayment options, and then how do they compare against each other. So this, if you've used this before, it has been recently updated, and it's much, much better now, a lot more offerings in terms of making good decisions. So you can do two things. You can log in to studentaid.gov loan simulator with your FAFSA credentials, and it'll pre-populate any federal loans plus interest rate that you already have, and then you enter a little bit more identifying information like your income if you want to populate an income-based repayment. Or you can start from scratch. So this is how I use it in my office. Since I know that there are loan limits for direct federal direct loans, education loans. Since I know there are limits, I know that, if I'm going to I'm an undergraduate and I'm a dependent student, I'm allowed $5,500 year one, $6,500 year two, $7,500 each additional year. So it's $27,000. If I look at the interest rates on federal student loans from 2013 to 2020, the average is about 4%. So it's 2.75 this coming up year. It was 4.5 last year. If I look back all the way to 2013, the interest rate average is about 4.1. So if I wanted to sort of predict what I was going to borrow based on those amounts and based on that interest rate, that gives me some ability to sort of play around a little bit. What if I borrowed this? Or what if I borrowed less? Or what if I borrowed more? So you can get results that way. So let's look at some results. So this is a shot of part of the results page. So the inputs, I said, okay, I have $19,000 in subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and subsidized loans are loans that do not accrue interest while the student is in school or while the student is in a grace period, but begin accruing interest after that grace period is over. Unsubsidized loans begin accruing interest as soon as they're dispersed to the school. So you're going to have some combination of that with your federal loan. So I said I have $19,000 in combined subsidized and unsubsidized loans. My interest rate's 4.5%, and I make $35,000 a year. What are my options for repayment on federal loans? So they gave me 6 options for repayment, but I really could only fit 3 on the page, so I took 3 to look at. So we have our standard repayment all the way over to the left. So this basically takes what you've borrowed plus interest and breaks it up evenly over a 10-year period. So this says on standard repayment for $19,000 at 4.5%, you're looking at $280 a month over a 10-year period, payoff date being June 2030, and the total amount you paid would be $33,626. The second one, graduated repayment. So again, if you look at the payoff date here, okay, June 2030, so it still falls within that 10-year period, but a graduated repayment plan allows you to start low and gradually increase every 2 years, and you'll repay your loan still in the 10-year period, but you'd start off with a lower monthly payment, $158, and end with a larger monthly payment. In this case, they estimate $473, and the total to be repaid, $35,303. So the last one is a revised pay-as-you-earn. So this one is an income-based one. So I put in that I was making $35,000 with these loans. This one says based on that income, you would have a payment monthly of $132. But as you can see, the payment period has extended beyond 10 years. So you have a lower monthly payment, but overall, if you look at the total amount to be paid, you would pay more over the life of the loan. So when we talk about an income-based repayment plan, what's really important to remember is The goal of an income-based repayment plan is to lower your monthly payment because it needs to be lowered right now for whatever reason. Because I don't have enough money in my budget each month to pay it, the standard payment, so I need it to be lower in order to make the payments, in order to avoid delinquency or default. But what you must understand with an income-based repayment plan is that it extends the life of the loan, so you will pay more interest over the life of the loan than you would have if you just stayed on the standard repayment plan. So income-based repayment plans or graduated repayment plans, these are tools to fit whatever situation that you're in. You might not want to pay more interest over the life of the loan. It might be feasible for you to do the standard repayment, then that's what you should do. If you could do the standard repayment plus more, that's going to save you even more on interest. Again, think back to what we were talking about. What are your financial goals? How do you get there? That debt and freedom pull in different directions. To get that tiny house, to get that beach house, you need to make decisions now. How quickly can I pay this off? How quickly do I need to pay this off? What can I afford? That's going to work for you in your plan. And if you notice here on this slide also, we have an add to comparison button there. You can compare one against the other and say, well, what does the standard repayment look like against an income-based payment? And this on the slide is just one of the income-based options. There are others that just look at different percentages of your income as discretionary or viable. This one that's on here, Repay, looks at 10. So this is something that, when you get to the point of repayment, you would set up your payment plan with your loan servicer. Typically, you would just be put on the standard repayment plan automatically. If you know in advance, right out of the gate, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to have to look at what the income-based option might look at, or I might need to start with the graduated. I know I'm going into a profession where, the pay starts off low, but there is some increases that are incremental that I can count on. So then maybe the graduated plan works for me. So really to understand what each one of these plans can do for you and not do for you, and how that helps move forward your financial plans. So I had talked about one of the things that federal loans have is some protections attached to them that you wouldn't find typically with, say, a private loan. So one of those that we just talked about was your income-based repayment option. So if you find yourself unable to pay the standard payment or the standard payment plus more, which would be advisable if your goal is to pay off the debt quickly and pay the least amount possible in terms of interest. However, if I run into an issue, my very first step is, okay, I am unable to make my monthly payment. What are my next steps? My next step is to say, would an income-based option work for me? And as I mentioned, there's several of those available, and they have different varying levels of what is considered discretionary income, 10%, 20%, 15%. They have different qualifiers for them, but there are income-based repayment plans available for federal loans where there wouldn't be typically for a private loan. So if I run into an issue of I have private loans and I have federal loans and I'm having trouble making both the payments, my only option is to work towards the income-based repayment plan for the federal so that I can put more towards the private loan. It may be higher interest anyways, so that would make more financial sense anyways. So you have some wiggle room basically with the payment for the federal student loans. If even the income base doesn't work for me, if I find myself, I've lost my job, I've had some sort of medical issue, something's happened, there's been a pandemic, there are options of deferment. So currently, if students are in repayment, they are on a deferment based on what's happening with COVID. But in regular times, if you find yourself unable to pay, you could apply for a deferment or you can apply for a forbearance. So both of these things work in similar ways. Basically what it does is suspends payments for a certain amount of time until you can clear up whatever the problem is. There are limits to how long you can use these. One thing to be aware of, though, is if you put your loans into a forbearance or a deferment, typically those loans are going to still accrue interest. So although the situation is at the time, I can't pay on an income base, I can't pay a standard, I just can't make the payment, but I suspect that this is going to be able to be cleared up in 3 or 4 months, I might put my loans into a deferment to avoid becoming delinquent on them just by not paying them or defaulting on them, which has a host of issues that come with defaulting on a federal student loan. So maybe I need to defer, or maybe I need to forbearance. But as far as financial decisions go, it's not the best financial decision because it may end up that it's accrued so much interest while it was deferred, that you find yourself in more debt once you get out of the deferment. So again, these are to be used as needed to help you out in a situation rather than just to avoid payment. You don't want to avoid payment because interest is still going to accrue. You really want to clear these up as soon as possible. So deferment and forbearance are protections, but you need to be aware of what the downfall would be of utilizing those protections. Say if you just consistently are putting your loan into a forbearance, another forbearance, another forbearance, it's not really helping you. A couple other federal protections that come with student loans. Of course, there's a discharge for death or permanent disability that you would work out the permanent disability discharge through your servicer, should that become the case. And there are also programs that federal loans that are available for federal loans, like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program or the Teacher Loan Forgiveness Program. Again, good and bad things about that. I'm sure in the news you've read about public service loan forgiveness and how, it's a program that has not had a ton of success. But the idea is that if you work in public service for 10 years and you repay your loans on an income basis, otherwise they would be repaid in 10 years on the standard repayment. If you repay those loans over 10 years on an income basis and you're working in public service, the remainder of those loans after 10 years would be forgiven, tax-free forgiven. There's a lot of hoops to jump through for that. There's a lot of paperwork involved in that. There's a lot of certifications of where you're working and whether that falls under the category of public service. But it can work, and I would suggest that if you're going into public service, going to be a police officer or something, you're going to be a teacher, that you go to studentaid.gov and you read about what the requirements are and what you need to do. So I would never counsel someone to go into a public service job because they're trying to get forgiveness. I would say if I found myself in a public service job, that I would then educate myself on how the program works and whether or not that might be something that's feasible for me or not feasible for me. So the jury's, I think, a little bit out on public service loan forgiveness. So those are the protections that come with your federal student loans. So I was just saying earlier that, the conversation about repayment is something that we're generally having towards the end of the life cycle of your education. Oh, I'm graduating, this is very exciting. I still have 6 months before my loans come into repayment. And I think that's sort of typically the way that people look at it. But I think a different way to look at it would be, in our first few slides, I talked about, well, what are my obligations now? What are my financial goals down the line? So what if you do have some ability to pay now? So we're talking with online students here. We're talking with some graduate students here who may be working full-time, maybe working part-time, not necessarily your traditional living in a dorm type student. So I wanted to put this example up just to sort of illustrate that yes, payments can be made while you're in school. Interest-only payments can be made while you're in school. So I put this slide up here that says, okay, I borrowed $20,000. This is sort of vague, but I borrowed $20,000 at an interest rate of 6.8. During the time that the loan was in deferral, I was going to school or the loan was deferred, it has accrued interest of $5,700. So when I go into repayment, the balance on that loan is $25,700. So that $5,700 has been capitalized. It's been added to my principal balance, and then the payment is recalculated based on that amount. So that would make my standard monthly payment $295, and my total payment amount $35,489. That's without making any interest payments while I'm in school, just letting the loan sit there and be deferred while I complete my education. The second column says, well, what if I took a different approach and I borrowed $20,000 and I paid the interest as it was accruing. So I monthly paid the interest to my servicer. And by the time I actually got to repayment, I had paid all the interest every month on the loan. So my principal balance is $20,000. So how does that change things? Well, it changes my standard monthly payment to 230.16. And it changes my total repayment amount to $33,318, and that's including the $5,700 that you paid in interest over the years that you were in deferment. So that's something to think about. You know, paying interest only while you're in school, or just making payments while you're in school, making payments on the interest, making payments on the principal, whatever you can do to lessen the load when you get out. I think the idea of deferring is something that we need to reconsider, because when you defer loans and they accrue interest, that's not doing anything good for the borrower. So people need to understand that, and they need to sort of dig deep and say, is there a way I could do this differently? Is there any way I could pay the interest on this? Is there any way I can make full monthly payments as I go along? So that's just something for you to consider. And then as far as budgeting is concerned, we did a poll on iGrad recently, or we looked at a poll on iGrad recently that said that people were really interested in understanding budgets. And I think the thing that I find interesting about budgeting is that we budget all the time. We budget, for example, when say we're going to go on vacation and we've got, you know, $600 to spend. So then we break it down. What does that mean I can spend each day over the time that I'm there, right? So that's like mental budgeting. Or I have $100 in my checking account and I'm writing a check for 25. That means I have 75 left. So that's all budgeting, right? So I think we all do that, even though people say, oh, budgeting, I don't do it. I don't not interested in budgeting. I think what we don't do is use our budgets. So we do budget, whether it's mentally or whether we make spreadsheets or however we decide to budget. But what we don't do is look at the data that comes from our budgeting. So as we're talking about inviting a student loan payment into our budget, it's a good time to reassess, how am I budgeting? What am I doing monthly to make sure that I'm able to achieve my goals? So budgeting, it kind of freaks people out sometimes because they look at it as something that's very restrictive, and that is the number one mistake of budgeting, is people make their budgetings too restrictive, so then they can't stick with it. It becomes something that's uncomfortable. It becomes something that they can't stick to. It's too difficult. So when you're creating a budget, it's really important to give yourself some wiggle room, to give yourself a little bit of leeway there. So make it a way of looking at it as an opportunity and not as something that's restricting you. It's an opportunity to grow your money by having a good eye on it and by watching all the working parts and making sure you're doing everything you can. So one of those ways is to start with, what are your fixed expenses? So my fixed expenses are going to be the things that are the same every month, the things that are due every single month, typically the same amount, typically the same date. So that's going to be my mortgage, or it's going to be my rent, or it's going to be now my student loan payment as well. So now's a good time to assess, what are my fixed payments now before I'm in repayment, and then go utilize that student loan simulator to get an idea of what your federal loan payment would be. Or if you have a private loan, you should be able to log into their app or their website and get an estimated payment for your private student loan. So you need to figure out what your fixed expenses are going to be once you add this student loan in here as well. And then understand what your variable expenses are. So those are going to be the things that change from month to month. I mean, groceries are variable. Your gas might be variable. Your credit card could be variable. You spent a lot one month. You didn't spend as much the next month. That's obviously going to be different. And typically your variable expenses are the things that can be cut out. Your fixed expenses are fixed, exactly what they sound like. They're fixed. So if you're looking to trim a budget, you need to look at your variable expenses. And sometimes that's things like subscriptions that you're paying for, memberships that you're paying for that you're not using. It could be lowering a grocery bill and things like that. So utilizing a system is an excellent way to begin to budget. So like I said, if you're an Excel whiz, creating a spreadsheet, great. There are apps available like Mint, which is pictured up there, mint.com, which does the work for you. A lot of analysis of your data. So it's bank level security. You hook up your bank and your debt and your credit accounts to it, in your bank account to it, and then it sort of looks at what's going in, what's coming out, what category does it fall into, and then it provides data that says, okay, here's where you're spending. So this gives you an opportunity to say, okay, where is my money going? Am I spending too much in a certain category? Is that a category that I have some ability to cut back on? So important to utilize something and sort of be on a schedule. Know the interest rates. of your outstanding debt. So we were talking about interest rates as far as student loans were concerned, being about, on average, 4%. Private loans being about 7%. Credit card interest rates are all over the place, but they could be, 10, 11, 12%. Why is that important? Because your higher interest debts obviously are going to cost you more over the lifetime of that debt. So that helps you come up with a strategy. So if I'm looking at, for example, I have a credit card debt, say $10,000, that has 12% interest on it. I have a car loan for $5,000 that has 3% interest on it. Then I have a student loan that has 4% interest on it. So I want to look at how much do I owe on each one of those things. I want to look at what the interest rates are on those things and then make a strategy based on that information. So some that you may be familiar with, strategies for debt pay down would be the snowball method. So this one is when you line up your debts in order of outstanding balance from smallest to largest, and you make minimum payments on all of those debts, except on the smallest debt, you pay more than the minimum payment, as much as you can. So you focus all your extra payments towards that smallest debt amount. So what this does is you quickly pay off that first small debt, and then you take whatever you were putting towards that first small debt and you move it to the second largest debt, and so on and so forth. So there's some psychological benefits to that in that it is a quick pay down. You see some results. It's motivating. The avalanche method is similar, where you line up your debts, but this time you line them up in order of interest rate. So when we were talking about that credit card, that car loan, and that student loan, that credit card would be the one that I would put my focus to because it has 12% interest on it. So I'm going to pay minimum payment on all my other payments, or just whatever's due, and then anything extra is going to go towards that high interest, 12% interest credit card, and I'm going to pay that down quickly. So mathematically, that makes more sense. Because you're going to pay less over the life of that debt because you've paid extra, you've cut down the amount of interest you're going to pay over those years. So avalanche is better mathematically than the snowball. The snowball might be more effective because of that component of actually watching some of those debts, and this debt is completely gone, and now I'm going to move on to my next one. So there's satisfaction there for sure. But either way, just having something in mind that you're going to use, some sort of method that you're going to use in order to create a plan, stick to that plan. This paying off debt is a long process, and there really isn't anything that's going to speed it up other than winning the lottery or something like that. But the main thing is to create a plan, to stick to that plan, to follow through. So that means having a budget, and that means having a debt payoff plan so you can get to those things that we talked about in the beginning, the reasonable retirement and the tiny house, or the house on the beach, and the different things that people were looking for. And just a couple more things here that I wanted to review. So just to sort of review of how we even got to where we are right now is, so we looked at what types of loans do we have. So we have private loans, we have federal loans. Federal loans have a lot of moving parts in terms of how you can repay them, different programs that they can fall into, like public service loan forgiveness, different options of deferment or forbearance. We looked at tools to sort of estimate what your repayment amounts may be before you actually get to repayment, so that you can stick those into your budget and make sure that that works. That might drive your decision making on how much you're going to borrow going forward. Maybe I should see if I can use some cash that I saved up this summer to pay for this course rather than take out another loan, because when I went into NSLDS, I realized that my loan amounts were really pumping up, and I really want to put the brakes on that, because if I estimate my monthly payment, my federal monthly payment afterwards, it's looking like it's not going to work in my budget. So taking some sort of control now while you're still in the deferment part of the deferment phase is going to help. We talked about making payments early, making interest-only payments while you're in school, while you're deferred, or making full payments while your loan is technically deferred is going to be a good financial decision overall, if it's possible. And then we talked about, how we're going to fit these things into a budget and best practices for that. There are a couple other things to consider, and I didn't talk a ton about private loans because private loans are pretty cut and dry. They're black and white. So you have an interest rate that typically that's fixed, and we said that average interest rate was about 7.8%, not always, but average. And those have typically a standard repayment, not a lot of wiggle room for forbearance, not a lot of wiggle room for income-based payments or things like that. So that sort of is what it is. So that is just a bill that is in your fixed expense in your budget. And it was the federal loans that actually had some ability to make some moves. And then a few more things to add on those federal loans is a question about direct loan consolidation. So direct loan consolidation is a product for federal student loans through the federal government, through studentaid.gov, that says, okay, you can take, if you've had several federal loans over your years of school, you can take them and you can combine them into one loan with one monthly payment and one federal loan servicer. Typically, you're going to find if you've taken out federal loans, they are usually assigned to the same federal loan servicer. And there's just one loan payment, although if you go into that federal loan servicer, you'll see them all listed as separate loans. It's typically one servicer, one payment. But sometimes people want to do this for the sake of convenience. Sometimes people want to do this because they're trying to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, and part of that eligibility for public service loan forgiveness is that you have a specific type of education loan through the government, and that is the direct education loan. So they might have a PLUS loan, or they might have a Perkins loan, and they want to consolidate those all together so they all fall under the category of a direct loan. It's typically why people would use that. It's not a refinance. So if you did a direct loan consolidation, you may find that your income or that your monthly payment is less, but that's just because typically the repayment span of the loan is extended. So it wouldn't reduce an interest rate. In fact, the way that it's calculated is that you would add up your interest rates and have an average of it, and then it would be added up 1/8%. So it does not reduce interest rate, it may increase your interest rate. So there are reasons to do direct loan consolidation, but they are limited. So this is something that I did right out of the gate when I had student loans. I consolidated because consolidation sounded like the right thing to do. I was just basing it on what my understanding of consolidation was. And what happened was I got a higher interest rate and a lower monthly payment, and I paid longer than the 10 years on that consolidation loan. So it's really important to understand, does this really benefit me? Just because it exists doesn't mean that I should take advantage of it if it's not going to help me move forward in my finances. And then often confused with would be private loan refinancing. So this is something that's a little bit different. This is similar to if you're going to refinance a car loan or you're going to refinance your mortgage. So this is when you create a new loan, potentially with a lower interest rate, depending on credit factors and income factors. So say you took out a private student loan, had a high interest rate, you had an 11% interest rate when you took it out. So now you've graduated, you've been working for a couple of years, your credit score is pretty steady, you have a reliable income coming in, so you want to bring that loan to another bank and say, can you offer me something better? Can I refinance this loan to get a better rate than 11%, which is going to cost me a lot over the lifetime of this loan? So that's a refinance. So it could lower your monthly payments by extending the repayment term. You could come up with a lower interest rate than you started. Sometimes people refinance because they're interested in releasing a co-signer from a private loan that they have. So if they're prepared and they have the stuff to handle this loan on their own, they might be looking at a refinance for that. So the major thing is, though, people ask all the time, can federal loans and private loans be consolidated together? So right off the bat, this sounds like a great thing because, you just have that one payment. So it's a pain. I have my private loan payment to Citizens Bank, and then I also have my federal loan payment that I'm paying off to Fed Loan. It's confusing, and I'm afraid that I'm going to end up, missing a month because I have two payments. But it's really important to know that although you can combine federal and private loans together into a new loan, a new private loan refinance, If you do that, that federal loan is no longer a federal loan. It becomes a private loan. So what does that mean? That means that those protections that we've talked about throughout the presentation don't apply anymore. So if you were trying to do public service loan forgiveness and you refinance that federal loan into a private loan refinance, you're no longer eligible because that loan is no longer eligible. It's no longer a federal loan. If you feel like you might utilize income-based repayments or you might utilize deferments or forbearance or something like that, if you think you might need those things, it would not be wise to take that federal loan and put it together with a private loan for the sake of convenience because you would lose those protections that you have. It may be that you feel like you don't need to use any of those protections, that you feel pretty solid going forward. But then the other thing to consider with that would be if I do refinance this federal loan with my private loan, how does that change the interest rate? Because those federal interest rates are going to be pretty low and fixed anyways. So my advice, I think, here would be certainly look at a private student loan refinance if you have a terrible interest rate and you're looking to get that down to help get yourself out of debt. But maybe leave the federal loan where it is because, like I said, there's a lot of leeway, there's a lot of wiggle room to make that choice. So federal loan consolidation, private loan refinancing, things that are often confused. There's a lot of questions about should I do one or the other. And again, studentaid.gov is going to give you the information that you're going to need to know about federal direct consolidation and whether that's something that is going to work for you. Your loan servicer, your federal loan servicer could talk to you about that. And then as far as private loan refinancing, this is something that, a quick Google search of who's doing private education loan refinancing and who has the best rates. That's something that's readily available of who's doing a good job with that right now. Wouldn't apply for anything without doing the research first. You don't want to hit your credit score with too many applications. So definitely do a little research, make a few phone calls, and see if there's something better out there before you actually get into the whole process of a refi. And there are some resources here that I wanted to sort of shout out that are very helpful. I'm going to start from the bottom, actually. Our office has a partnership with iGrad, and iGrad is a financial literacy tool that is available on your MySNU homepage. It's listed under Financial Success Powered by iGrad. If you click in there, if you haven't already, and you register an account just by giving your name and answering a few questions about your financial goals, then you have this great free resource that offers modules. So if you want to learn about how interest works, if you want to learn how investing works, if you want to learn how taking out a mortgage works or buying health insurance, and all those things, there are modules for that. There's videos. It's really a great tool to help supplement your financial literacy if you feel like there's some holes in that. So that's available free. It's on your MySNU homepage. You just need to log in once, and it's single sign-on. Every time you click on it, you'll be there, and it's great. NSLDS I mentioned as a clearinghouse for your federal student loans. So this was where you could look up your information if you feel confused about, I took out a few federal loans a few years ago, I think, but I'm not sure. I know they're still deferred because I've been in school, but they were with a different school. So NSLDS is good for that, and you'd use your FAFSA credentials to get there. TISLA is another great website for student loan information. I like it because the way it's presented is very much real talk. It's very easy to understand. There's not a lot of big, huge financial terms attached to it. It's just this is what it is and this is how it works. So I find it as a good place to get just sort of the basic information that you're looking for. That federal repayment simulator at studentaid.gov is available for either logging in with your FAFSA credentials, or it's available to just go in and sort of play around with and see what your results might be, changing interest rates or changing amounts and things like that. And you can also go, if you wanted to do a private loan repayment calculator, NerdWallet has one. If you just go in and Google that, that is simply just looking at your principal balance, your interest rate, and the number of years of repayment, and then that'll give you a repayment plan for that. And then the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, also great place for information along with studentaid.gov in terms of how these programs and resources work. So we're almost at time here.
Thank
here we
you.
are.
Thank you, Kerry. That was great. We're going to turn it over for questions. We have a few minutes left, so please use the chat box, and we'll pass along your questions to Kerry. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded for future viewing, so we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can in the remaining few minutes that we have. So we will go from there, so feel free to put those questions in there for Kerry. So one of the first questions is, what about looking at grants to repay loans? What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's a little confusing for me. Grants would be, a grant or a scholarship are typically to pay tuition to a school so that you would reduce the amount that you would have to borrow. I don't know of any grants that would be used to repay a loan, but one thing I would look at would be looking, when you're looking for employment and you're in that interview and they're talking to you about what some of the benefits are, a lot of companies are moving towards the option of making some portion of student loan repayment for the new hire over a certain amount of time, and that is a fantastic benefit, and it's really sort of, I think, catching on because there are some tax benefits for the employer. So I guess I would need to know what types of grants. Grants are typically used during the school process.
Thank you, Kerry. Next question we have is, how far does the federal student loan go back as in regard to federal forgiveness?
How long does can you read that again?
How far does the federal student loan go back to, as in public service loan forgiveness?
When did it start? Maybe I think is what we're looking at there. So it's over a 10-year period, so I think the first 10-year period happened in 2010. I think it was 2010. So I guess I'm not really understanding the question.
It was yes. When did it start? She added that after, yes.
Yeah, I think it's 2000. I think it was 2000. So it's been through exactly one cycle at this point. It should be sort of coming up on the second cycle now. And then what we were sort of talking about during the presentation in the news was, not that many people, a really low percentage of people actually got the forgiveness. So whether or not those issues have been addressed is something to consider when you're considering trying for public service loan forgiveness. Sometimes for some people it just would come in naturally because, I'm in this job, I plan on staying in this job, I'm making income-based repayments anyways. But, this is the thing with public service loan forgiveness for me that kind of stresses me out, that if I make income-based payments in order to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, what if I get to that 10-year point and this program doesn't exist anymore? Because let's be honest, these programs can come and go, and this one has been a little wounded, I think, in its results. So there are a lot of things to consider before jumping into that.
Okay, we have time.
I see a question that I like.
Yeah, we have time for.
I see one that I like.
Okay, go ahead. Go for it if you see one that you like.
I see one that I like. I see one. It's just below, is loan forgiveness legit? And it sounds like a scam. It is legit, but it's difficult to get. But the question is, what's a good balance point between paying back loans and keeping an emergency fund? That is a great question. People ask this all the time. Like, should I be putting all my money toward my debt, or should I be putting my money towards my savings? A split down the middle would be perfect, right? Because you want to be paying down debt as much as possible, but you want to have that savings just in case an emergency comes up. So if that emergency comes up and you have no savings, you're probably going to end up using that credit card, and you're probably going to get yourself in further debt because you didn't have that. So I would say a good split down the middle, go half and half. Don't put all your money towards your debt. You have to pay yourself first, which is a common thing we hear. And by doing that is by putting money into your savings account to preclude further debt accumulation.
Okay, I think we might have time for a few more. One is, if I have a disability, will my situation affect my loans?
In repayment, if you become permanently disabled, there would be an opportunity for discharge for that, but there should, otherwise, no.
Okay. And I've taken out private student loans with my parents co-signing. Will this affect me taking out federal student loans since I'm no longer dependent on them?
So would it affect you? So you would be considered, to be considered dependent or independent is not sort of, I'm not dependent on my parents anymore. Independent students are either 25 or older, they're in the armed services, they are married, they have a child they support 50 or more % of the time. So there are a few things there that would make a person considered independent. So that would mean that when I file the FAFSA form, I don't put my parents' information on. So if you fall into one of those categories, you would be considered independent on the FAFSA, which would allow for higher borrowing amounts for you. If you're dependent, that means you're under 25, or any of those other things, so you're under 25 basically, then you're considered dependent and your parents' information is on the FAFSA and you're at that dependent borrowing rate, which is lower. So it wouldn't, the only way that would affect you, the private loan would have no effect on the federal loans, long story short.
Okay, and maybe one more quick one. Is there a penalty for early repayment? Also, what do I do if I no longer need the loans, which I think you kind of answered, but is there a penalty for early repayment?
Nope, there's no prepayment penalty, so that should really encourage people to do what they can now.
Okay. I think that's all we have time for, Kathy.
Yes, and thank you so much, Kerry. This has been very informative. Let me go ahead and transition us over to this slide here. I just want to thank everyone so much for coming. Huge thank you to Kerry for all of the valuable information we learned today. I know we still had some questions coming in, so if you have more questions, you think of questions later, please feel free to join us in the community for follow-up. And Kerry has also graciously offered the download of her presentation. You can see that button in the Files section here. So all of those links, tools, resources that she was referencing, feel free to download that PowerPoint. I know she also included her contact information there for follow-up questions. And a reminder that the recording will be available for viewing in SNU Connect after. So we encourage you to join us for conversations there. And we hope to see everyone for our next lead session this afternoon at 3 p.m. on growth mindset. And again, thank you all so much for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon.